Melanie Reizes Klein and her object relations theory. Just a brief summary of Melanie Reizes Klein's biography. She was born on March 30, 1882, in Vienna, Austria. She was the youngest of four children born to Dr. Morris Reizes and his second wife, Libusa Doce Reizes. Klein believed that her birth was unplanned. She made it personal. That's why it made her believe that um, she was often rejected by her parents. She also grew up in a family that was neither pro religious nor anti religious because she was witnessing at that time that her father was becoming rebellious against the Orthodox Jewish religion. During her childhood, she observed that her parents were working at jobs they didn't enjoy. Her father was a physician who struggled to make a living in medicine, and eventually, he was relegated to be working as a dental assistant, meaning to say he got demoted to be a dental assistant. On the other hand, her mother ran a shop selling plants and reptiles, but she didn't actually enjoy doing it because she was afraid of those creatures. Despite her father's meager income as a doctor, she got inspired to become a physician. She felt neglected by her elderly father, whom she saw to be cold and distant. And although she loved and idolized her mother, she felt suffocated by her. So there is that dichotomy of feelings towards her parents. Now, Klein became so close to her older sister, and she felt neglected and devastated when her older sister died, whom she always idolized. And after her sister's death, it drove her to be closer to her brother Emmanuel. But on her 18th year, her older brother Emmanuel died. And immediately after her brother's death, she got married at the age of 21 to an engineer named Arthur Klein, whom she believed to have been preventing her to pursue medical studies. And her marriage to Arthur produced three children. Melita, who was the eldest, was born in 1904, and she didn't actually had this meaningful and um, harmonious relationship with Melita, who also considered her to be a colleague rather than her own mother. Hans was born in 1907 and Eric was born in 1909. Now, when Eric was still young, this was also the time when Melanie learned about Freud and psychoanalysis. That's why she began to apply her knowledge in psychoanalysis with how she was able to raise Eric. Now, this is a picture of Melanie together with her children, Hans and Melita. As a theorist, Melanie emphasized that the nurturing and loving relationship between the parent and the child is very important in the person's personality development. And this is quite ironic with what happened between her and Melita, since there was a rift between their mother and daughter relationship. And you're also seeing some earlier pictures of Melanie's family, and you may also be wondering why Arthur was not in the picture. And this is also the kind of picture or condition Melita was confused about, since Melanie and Arthur had a wobbly relationship until eventually they also got divorced. Melanie met Sandor Ferenczi, a member of Freud's inner circle and the person who introduced her into the world of psychoanalysis. And when her mother died, Klein became depressed and entered analysis with Ferenczi. she was deeply taken by psychoanalysis to a point that she trained her son, Eric, according to the Freudian principles. As part of the program, she psychoanalyzes her children. You're seeing a picture of Freud's inner circle together with Firenze. You may recall that Melita didn't actually had um, a warm and close relationship with her mother, Melanie Klein, but ironically, she got interested in psychoanalysis and she became a psychoanalyst herself. But she refused to be psychoanalyzed by her own mother. That's why she consulted Karen Horney to be her psychoanalyst. And going back to Klein, unfortunately, she didn't had a happy marriage. She dreaded sex and abhorred pregnancy. Klein separated from her husband, Arthur, in 1919, but didn't obtain a divorce for several years. Now, from Vienna, Klein moved to Berlin and established a psychoanalytic practice and made her first contributions to the psychoanalytic literature with a paper dealing with her analysis of Eric. This somehow paved way for her to also formulate her principles for her personality theory. And it was also this time when Klein moved to improve some of Freud's concepts and principles. That's why Freud accused Melanie Klein of causing too much confusion when she practiced in Berlin, most especially with the psychoanalysts who strictly followed his core concepts and principles. Not completely satisfied with her own analysis by Firenze, she ended the relationship and began an analysis with Carl Abraham, the or one of the members of Freud's inner circle. And after 14 months, Abraham died. Abraham's death also caused damage on the part of Melanie Klein. That's why, at the point of her life, she decided to begin to do a self analysis. And in 1919, both Klein and Freud based their theories of child development. And from Berlin, she moved to London to avoid conflicts with pre existing practice in psychoanalysis, because it was also this time when Anna Freud moved to the same area, and they were often considered to be rivals. Although Melanie Klein claimed to be practicing Freudian psychology, Sigmund and Anna Freud didn't agree with her emphasis on child psychoanalysis. Again, it was because of some modifications and some alterations when it comes to the different concepts and principles that Melanie Klein was able to incorporate in her personality theory, which Freud claimed that it only brought confusions among psychoanalysts who were following him. Now, in 1934, Klein's older son, Hans, was killed in a fall, and Melita, who had recently moved to London, maintained that her brother had committed suicide and she blamed Melanie for it. Melita began analysis with Edward Glover, one of Klein's rivals in British society, and Klein and her daughter then became professionally antagonistic, and Melita maintained her animosity even after her mother's death. In 1946, the British Society accepted 3 training procedures relating to psychoanalysis. Those who followed the traditional concepts and principles of Melanie Klein. Another group also advocated to be following Anna Freud, and there is also the third group who also accepted neither training school but was more eclectic in their approach, meaning to say they accepted some concepts and principles from Melanie Klein and also from Anna Freud's. Now let's talk about object relation theory or object relations theory of Melanie Klein. You may recall that Eric, the youngest son of Melanie, became her subject as she was learning about psychoanalysis, which later evolved into this theory of personality. And object relation theory was based on careful observations of infants. And in contrast to Freud's first 4 to 6 years of life, Klein emphasizes the importance of 4 to 6 months after birth. She insisted that the infant's drive, such as hunger, sex, and other drives, are directed to an object, just like the breasts, penis, a vagina, and so on. In her theory, Klein stresses that the child's relation to the breast is considered to be a prototype for later relationships towards his or her parents and other individuals. In other words, our earlier experiences of a good breast and a bad breast may lead for us to be having a prototype of later relationships with our mother, our father, and even in our relationships with the significant other or our partners later on in life. According to Klein, the very early tendency of infants to relate to partial objects gives their experiences an unrealistic or fantasy-like quality that affects all later interpersonal relations. That's why Klein's ideas tend to shift the focus of psychoanalytic theory from organically based stages of development to the role of early fantasy in the formation of interpersonal relationships. So, if Freud emphasized the conscious and the unconscious, Melanie Klein believed that as early as the first of 4 to 6 months of life or after birth, this period is considered to be a critical time for children's fantasy in the formation of interpersonal relationships later on in life. Now, we could understand that object relations theory is an offspring of Freud's instinct theory, but it differs from its ancestor in at least 3 general ways. First, object relations theory places less emphasis on biologically based drives and more importance on consistent patterns of interpersonal relationships. So, as mentioned earlier, Klein did not emphasize so much about the inner drives of the person, but she tried to put emphasis or importance on consistent patterns of interpersonal relations. Second, as opposed to Freud's rather paternalistic theory that emphasizes the power and control of the father, object relations theory tends to be more maternal, stressing the intimacy and nurturing of the mother. And third, object relations theorists generally see human contact and relatedness, not sexual pleasure, as the prime motive of a human behavior. Again, human contact and relatedness are the ones considered to be the prime motive of human behavior, not sexual pleasure as compared with Freud's psychoanalysis. In this idea, we could say that Freud himself is the father of object relations theory, while Klein herself is the mother. Now, Klein didn't believe the claim that humans are born as black slate, but they have already inherited some predispositions to reduce anxiety by conflicts between life and death instincts. If you may recall in our earlier discussions about psychoanalysis, Freud believed um, that instincts or drives have an impetus, a source, an aim, and an object. An impetus could be hunger experienced by a child or an infant who cries because there is already the presence of the impetus all over the body. Remember that an impetus is the amount of energy or force that the instinct exerts. Now, the source could be the mother's nipple, where the infant receives nourishment. Now, the aim is basically to reduce hunger, and the object is the caring mother. Now, in Klein's personality theory or object relations theory, she put more emphasis with the aim and the object. She had put greater psychological significance on these two terminologies or concepts. And although different drives may seem to have separate aims, their underlying aim is always the same, and that is to reduce tension, which is the aim, and to achieve pleasure. And in Freudian terms, the object of the drive is any person, part of a person, and it could be a thing through which the aim is satisfied. Let's go now to fantasies. If you may recall, Klein emphasized and stressed the importance of the first 4 or 6 months of life. And one of her basic assumptions is that the infant, even at birth, possesses an active fantasy life. Now, if you may look at the screen, fantasy is spelled with a PH or with starting letters of PH. This is to actually put emphasis that these fantasies are not just the representations of the unconscious of the id instincts, but they are also, to rectify the earlier statement, fantasies are spelled with starting letters of PH. This is to also emphasize that these are the psychic representations of the unconscious id instincts. Klein intentionally spelled fantasy with a PH to also note that it is distinguishable. When Klein wrote of the dynamic fantasy of life infants, she did not suggest that neonates could put thoughts into words, but she simply emphasized that they possess the unconscious images of good and bad. So, for example, a full stomach is good, an empty one is bad. And we could somehow say that infants who fall asleep while sucking on their fingers are fantasizing about having their mother's good breast inside themselves. So this is already talking about the object being introjected into the infant's body or system. When we say introjected, that good side or good quality or the good breast as an object is now being integrated into the infant's unconscious representation or image of a good breast. And on the other hand, hungry infants who cry and kick their legs are fantasizing that they are kicking or destroying the bad breast. As the infant matures and conscious fantasies connected with the breast continue to exert an impact on the psychic life, but newer ones emerge as well. These later unconscious fantasies are shaped by both reality and by inherited predispositions. If you may recall, phylogenetic endowment, a concept which Freud also introduced in his theory of psychoanalysis. With the examples provided, we now understand that the fantasies are the earlier unconscious images of the infants, giving them an idea of um, what is good and what is bad. Just like, for example, with infants, fantasizing about the Oedipus complex. It is like the child's wish to destroy one parent and sexually possess the other. And because these fantasies are unconscious, they can be contradictory. For example, a little boy can fantasize both beating his mother and having babies with her. Such fantasies spring partly from the boy's experiences with his mother and partly from the universal predisposition or predispositions to destroy the bad breast and to incorporate the good one. And in a general perspective, we could understand object relations theory with the assumption and the idea that the fantasies are like the building blocks of the introjected attributes into the person's personality and later on projected by the individual to their partners later on in life. Now let's go to objects. Objects are drives or instincts paired or with an identified object. So this is when or where exerted and applied, and Klein believed that an infant relates their own drives to external objects both in fantasy and also in reality. So in their active fantasy, infants introject or take into their psychic structure these external objects, including the father's penis, their mother's hands and face, and other body parts. And introjected objects are more than internal thoughts about external objects. They are fantasies of internalizing the object in concrete and physical terms. So, just like, for example, children who have introjected their mother believe that she is constantly inside their own body. And Klein's notion of internal objects suggests that these objects have a power of their own, comparable to Freud's concept of a superego, which assumes that the father's or the mother's conscience is carried within the child. So, in other words, objects could be a person, a part of the person, or a thing that may help infants to also target the aim, which is basically what I was saying earlier about reducing tension. So it could be the father's penis, the mother's vagina, or the breasts, leading for the infant to introject these objects into their psychic structure until it may resemble like that of Freud's superego, which could help the infant or child identify what is assumed to be good or be bad. It's because the images of the father or the mother's conscience are being introjected and being carried within the child. Now, Klein saw human infants as constantly engaging in a basic conflict. between the life instinct and the death instinct. The same concept that is also present in psychoanalysis. When we talk about the life instinct, these are the internal and psychic forces promoting life. While on the other hand, the death instincts are about our wishes and desires to also kill ourselves. And these basic conflicts, maybe between good and bad, love and hate, creativity and destruction, and the ego moves towards the integration and away from disintegration. Infants naturally prefer gratifying sensations over frustrating ones. And in the attempt to deal with the dichotomy of good and bad feelings, infants organize their experiences into positions. So in Klein's objects relation theory, she emphasized on using the term positions rather than the stages of development to indicate that positions alternate back and forth, and they are not periods of time or phases of development through which a person passes. Although she used some psychiatric and pathological labels, Klein intended these positions to represent normal social growth and development. And the two basic positions are the paranoid schizoid position and the depressive position.